Good morning, and welcome to the first forum on IP theft, protecting health and safety. We have an action-packed morning, so we're going to get right to it. Our host today, Victoria Espinel, serves as the first intellectual property enforcement coordinator in the White House. In her capacity as IP coordinator, Ms. Espinel is charged with developing and implementing the administration's overall strategy for enforcement of intellectual property rights. Prior to her appointment by the President, Ms. Espinel served as a law professor at George Mason School of Law, teaching intellectual property and international trade law. She also served as the first assistant United States trade rep for intellectual property and innovation at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Ms. Espinel holds an LLM from the London School of Economics and a JD from Georgetown. Under her leadership, the administration has seen progress like never before on interagency coordination around IP enforcement. Please welcome Victoria Espinel.
Thank you. Welcome to our White House Forum on Intellectual Property Theft. We are all here today because of the importance of protecting consumer health and safety. I'm looking forward to learning from all of the experts in this room, including the members of our audience, about the health and safety risks of counterfeited products, the challenges that our businesses are facing, and some creative solutions to this problem. First, let me welcome the Attorney General, Secretary Napolitano, and Director Morton. These extraordinary public servants are extremely committed to this issue, and we are very fortunate to have them serving in this administration. And thank you to Tony West and to Laney Brewer for agreeing to moderate our panels today. I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspective since they're supervising the IP prosecutors on the front lines. We are also very fortunate to be hearing from Chairman Tenenbaum and Undersecretary Hormats later today, and we welcome all of you to the White House. I am privileged to serve as the first White House Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinator. I've been in this job for just over a year now, but I can already see the great progress that we're making. I believe effective enforcement begins with effective engagement with the private sector. Consumer health and safety is not just a government issue, it's a community issue. And working to protect the health of your community, of your customers, is good business and the right thing to do. We need to have a strong public-private partnership, and that is exactly what we are announcing today. We should not need to regulate or mandate new responsibilities for companies that interact with or benefit from internet commerce, or create new penalties for consumers. Instead, my office has taken what I believe can be an effective and efficient approach. We've gathered a group of smart, engaged people together and started talking to each other. More on that in just a few minutes. Let me give you a few examples of what we're dealing with. Last year, a major U.S. drug company found their anti-anxiety product had been counterfeited with phenobarbital, a drug that the Chinese use for lethal injections. It was being sold to U.S. consumers over the internet. This year in El Salvador, a vaccine given to children to prevent infection from bacteria was counterfeited and found to be missing the essential ingredient, exposing scores of children to infection. This year, 2 cancer drugs were found to have been counterfeited, one in China and one in Indonesia, and neither had the active ingredient for cancer treatment. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Professor Rick Roberts is here today. Rick was diagnosed with AIDS and prescribed, in a last attempt to save his life, an injectable growth hormone. After 6 months of injecting the legitimate drug, he noticed a stinging sensation, a difference in the size of his usual dosage, and a slightly darker packaging. He asked his pharmacist about it and was notified of a recall in 7 states because of counterfeiting. It was then that Professor Roberts realized he had injected 6 weeks' worth of the counterfeit drug. He could easily have died. Professor Roberts, thank you for being here and for sharing your story. And it's not just counterfeit drugs that endanger health and safety. There is a wide range of products that are counterfeited and don't live up to U.S. safety standards. Batteries that explode in a children's toy, electronics that cause house fires, toothpaste containing deadly chemicals. One of the things that we are working on is making sure that we have data that is as comprehensive and as accurate as possible. We need more data to inform our policies and ensure we are making smart decisions. But the data we do have makes clear that we have a big problem on our hands and we need to take aggressive steps to address it now. The Alliance for Safe Online Pharmacies estimates that there are between 30,000 and 40,000 active online drug sellers operating at any one time, and that only a fraction of those sellers are operating legitimately. Merck recently analyzed over 2,500 internet sites and found over 2,000 of those sites were selling their drugs without a prescription. Nearly 600 of them were selling Merck products at a price below the lowest wholesale average cost available to any market, anywhere, a clear indicator of counterfeits. The National Association of Boards of Pharmacy estimated that counterfeit drugs would reach $75 billion globally in 2010, with the U.S. believed to be the biggest target market. And today, the partnership at drugfree.org announced the result of a survey on consumers' online medication purchasing behavior. The survey results: 1 in 6 adults, approximately 16% of the adult population, has bought or currently buys prescription medications online without a doctor's prescription. Of the people who had ordered medications online without a doctor's prescription, 2/3 said that doing so was not safe at all. So for legitimate businesses that could and do offer safe drugs online, this is very bad news. 2/3 of Americans believe it is unsafe to buy online because of the experiences that they have had. The businesses that sell drugs online illegally are violating laws that were put in place to protect patients and to protect the public health. We must put a stop to this activity. In June, we released the first national roadmap for bolstering intellectual property enforcement, and we delivered that strategy to Congress. When we released the strategy, we said we would work with the private sector to encourage practical, efficient, voluntary solutions to deal with online infringement that would address repeated acts of infringement and respect fair process, competition, and free speech. We also said that with respect to illegal online pharmacies, specifically, we would encourage the private sector to develop voluntary protocols to take action. To that end, my office has hosted a series of meetings with companies that provide services to web-based pharmacies, including domain name registrars and registries, search engines, payment processors, and overnight shippers. The goal that they have been exploring is to have the private sector establish a mechanism to increase cooperation among themselves to take voluntary action against illegal sites. Many of those participants are here today, and I'd like to say thank you for joining us in this fight and for doing the right thing. I am pleased to announce that coming out of these meetings, a group of founding private sector partners announced today that they will form a new nonprofit to work with each other and the U.S. government to rid the internet of illegal pharmacies. Today, they have issued principles that will guide those efforts. Let me commend the hard work of those involved, and especially a few companies who really made this happen. Thank you very much for your leadership. And I'd like the representatives of those companies to stand up, if you don't mind, or raise your hand. American Express, Enom, GoDaddy, Google, MasterCard, Microsoft, Network Solutions, Newstar, PayPal, Visa, and Yahoo. This group of companies has taken an extraordinary and unprecedented step to combat illegal online pharmacies. We believe this will have a rapid and dramatic effect on illegal online pharmacies. This will change the rules of the road and make clear that legitimate companies will not interact with criminal actors and that the online world is not a safe haven for their reprehensible activities. Today, I put out a challenge to all business sectors that control, interact with, or benefit from internet commerce to work with us to eliminate illegal online pharmacies. With today's announcement, we send an important signal to governments around the world and to the global marketplace by demonstrating an approach that combines law enforcement and working closely and cooperatively with the private sector on effective voluntary enforcement efforts. The United States must continue to lead by example in this area as in others, and we are at our best when we work together to develop creative, practical, and efficient solutions that promote innovation and protect the foundation that enables the internet to fulfill its promise. My office is a new one and a small one, and our challenges are big and many. There is no way this would have been possible without the tremendous work of the people at the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, HHS, Commerce, state, USTR, everyone is pitching in with their best efforts. As we plow ahead, please let us know what we are missing. You are the eyes and ears on the ground, and many of you are seeing firsthand how counterfeiting affects consumers and businesses alike. And our door is always open. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the Attorney General of the United States. Eric Holder has taken a personal interest in this issue and has made it a priority for his Department of Justice. His leadership on intellectual property enforcement and implementation of the administration's joint strategy has been nothing less than exemplary. He recognizes that this is a global problem that demands global, well-coordinated solutions. He has strengthened partnerships with our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners. He has strengthened the intellectual property enforcement capabilities of our U.S. attorneys' offices and the FBI. And he has reestablished the Justice Department's Task Force on Intellectual Property. He is a model of leadership on this issue. Please join me in warmly welcoming the Attorney General of the United States.
Good morning. Good morning. Come on, folks. It's cold. You're supposed to be, Well, thank you, Victoria. It's a privilege to join you, Secretary Napolitano, Director Morton, and so many other critical partners as we kick off today's discussion. And I want to thank you and Andrew Klein and the rest of your team for your work in organizing this event and for bringing us all together. Now, I think that this summit really provides a unique and important opportunity to build on the progress that we have achieved over the last year in combating intellectual property crimes and protecting consumer health and safety. Through the efforts of policymakers and prosecutors, investigators and industry executives, law enforcement officers, and consumer advocates, we have really taken historic steps forward. The comprehensive strategic plan that the administration released this past summer is already helping the department to focus on and streamline its enforcement efforts. And the work that Victoria and her team are doing help to coordinate the agency's implementation of that plan has been exemplary. Now, while I'm confident and I am encouraged that we're on the right path, we cannot yet be satisfied. We cannot be satisfied as yet, and we must not become complacent. All of us must do more to ensure the health and the safety of our citizens, to protect intellectual property rights, to safeguard innovation, and to combat the growing number of organized criminal networks that profit by peddling counterfeits. We don't have time to waste, and every person in this room has a role, a very important role, to play. Today, when the theft of a single trade secret can destroy a burgeoning small business, America's entrepreneurs and industry leaders are relying on strong IP enforcement, but so are America's consumers and American families. When criminals sell counterfeit drugs or medical devices, real patients can pay the price. When knockoff electronic components or other parts make their way into our industrial and military supply chains, real people can get hurt. When profiteers substitute low-quality materials to make bulletproof vests, it puts real law enforcement officers in danger. Put simply, when fake goods find their way into our nation's marketplaces, the health and safety of our people can be severely compromised. Now, our nation's fight against dangerous counterfeits has never been more critical, but as we all know, this work has never been more difficult. The same technologies that spur growth in the legitimate economy also allow criminals to misappropriate the creativity of our innovators and our entrepreneurs, and to operate criminal enterprises that profit by selling imitations of legitimate products. In fact, for every quantum leap that we have made technologically or commercially, criminals, and often entire international criminal syndicates, have kept pace. They have developed sophisticated methods for counterfeiting products and trademarks, offenses that can have really devastating consequences for individuals, families, and communities. But these crimes, like other thefts of intellectual property, have serious economic consequences as well. They threaten the economic opportunities and financial stability of firms that sell legitimate goods. They suppress the ingenuity of our people and businesses, and they destroy jobs. Trafficking in counterfeits is not victimless, and the Justice Department is committed to making sure that it is not seen as a safe business strategy. Through the leadership of the department's criminal and civil divisions and our U.S. Attorney's offices, through the great work of the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, and with the critical help of the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, the FBI, and many other agency and law enforcement partners, I think we are succeeding in our efforts to safeguard intellectual property rights and to protect consumer health and safety. Now, over the last year, the Justice Department has made significant progress in prosecuting individuals and international criminal organizations that traffic in counterfeit goods and pharmaceuticals. In August, we successfully prosecuted a defendant who was selling fake cancer medications to patients in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The drugs, which he marketed as a rare experimental treatment, were manufactured in Canada, but advertised and sold globally over the internet. With assistance from Canadian and German authorities, this individual was apprehended and extradited to the United States, and he is now behind bars and has been sentenced to almost 3 years in prison. This fall, a jury in Houston, Texas, convicted a defendant of conspiring with people in China to traffic in counterfeit medicine. In this case, our partners in the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol discovered more than 6,000 counterfeit pills that were intended for distribution. Now, these pills weren't just misbranded. They were found to contain a substance that is used to manufacture sheetrock. That's right, sheetrock. Earlier this year, in Richmond, Virginia, the Justice Department won convictions in one of the largest IP cases in U.S. history, involving more than $100 million in counterfeit luxury goods. The defendants were part of an international group of criminals who owned and operated 13 companies and 8 manufacturing plants. In this case, as in so many others, the assistance of foreign partners really proved essential. On the Monday following Thanksgiving, known as Cyber Monday because it's billed as the busiest online shopping day of the year, Director John Morton and I announced the results of a joint operation to disrupt the online sale of counterfeit goods and copyrighted media. Working together, ICE and DOJ executed seizure warrants against more than 80 internet domain names that led to websites offering bargain prices for a diverse array of counterfeit goods. The deals, of course, were too good to be true. Now, by seizing these internet domain names, we disrupted the sale of thousands of counterfeit items. We cut off funds to those seeking to profit from the sale of illegal goods and willing to exploit the ingenuity of others. Perhaps most important, we reminded consumers to exercise caution when looking for deals and discounts online. We are also working to strengthen IP enforcement by investing in new technologies and communication tools, by supporting the development of public education campaigns, by encouraging collaboration with our private sector partners, and by incorporating the legal tools that we use routinely to combat money laundering, fraud, and other types of economic crime. We have also included intellectual property crime as a focus area of the Justice Department's International Organized Crime Strategy. And as Victoria mentioned, in February of this year, I reestablished the Justice Department's Task Force on Intellectual Property. Now, through the task force and other efforts, we have improved coordination with our partners in federal law enforcement and with our foreign counterparts. And less than 2 months ago, I traveled to Hong Kong and to China to meet with our international partners to discuss how we can improve bilateral enforcement efforts and close current gaps in our enforcement mechanisms. Put simply, the Justice Department's commitment and my own commitment to combating IP crime has never been stronger. But I realize that we simply cannot meet our goals and responsibilities on our own. Collaboration is essential across the federal government and with our law enforcement partners, our foreign counterparts, and also, most importantly, with the business community. This collaboration must become more seamless. Now, events like this forum are a step in the right direction. Together, we are signaling to each other, to those we're working to protect, and to those who we are determined to identify, stop, and bring to justice that a new era of IP enforcement has begun. So many of you are doing tremendous work to strengthen and to highlight our nation's intellectual property enforcement efforts, and I urge each of you to keep it up. The partnership that Victoria announced today is, I think, an important step forward. The internet remains a haven for illegal pharmacies and other operations that pose a danger to the American people, and we need a concerted, collaborative effort to put these illegal operations out of business. Now, with your help, I believe we can turn the page on a problem that threatens consumer safety and ultimately our nation's economic security. Together, I am confident that we can ensure that online intellectual property crime, so long seen as a domain of the future, can become a marker of the past. Thank you all.
Janet Napolitano is the third Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Prior to joining the Obama administration, she was midway through her second term as governor of the state of Arizona. Secretary Napolitano served as the Attorney General of Arizona and the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. She graduated from Santa Clara University in 1979 and received her Juris Doctor in 1983 from the University of Virginia School of Law. Under her leadership, the Department of Homeland Security has given priority to IP enforcement. Customs and Border Protection is on the front lines, detecting counterfeits as they enter our ports and cross our borders. And ICE has proven to be the leading investigative agency on this issue, time and time again. Please welcome the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano.
Well, thank you, and I join the previous speakers in welcoming you. I was just thinking about my time in Arizona. It was 75 degrees there yesterday. But I'm happy to be here in Washington with all of you, and very happy to be talking about this very important topic, which is intellectual property theft and counterfeiting. As has been mentioned before, we all know and share the thought that IP theft and counterfeiting can not only cost jobs because it affects the economy, but actually affect the health and safety of Americans. And because IP theft is a high-profit, low-risk crime, organized crime groups are engaging in it with greater frequency to fund other criminal activities. That includes counterfeiting products with health and safety consequences, like medications, baby formula, medical devices, electronic components. This is a growing problem. In fiscal year 2010, safety and security IPR seizures by Customs and Border Protection, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, but the seizures increased by 97%. Now, at DHS, we have made it a priority to aggressively pursue IP and counterfeiting violations, primarily through the efforts of CBP and ICE, and you'll hear from ICE in a moment. But we are also actively engaged in implementing the Intellectual Property Enforcement Coordinators, or IPEC, the Joint Strategic Plan for Enforcement. This is the plan that brings together DHS and the Justice Department and all the other many partners that need to be involved. We're working to meet the goals laid out in the strategic plan, which includes stopping the proliferation of counterfeit products that could threaten public health and public safety. In addition, CBP and ICE have played a major role in establishing the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, which leads the federal government's response to IP theft and brings together 14 agencies for that purpose. The IPR Center has launched a number of recent enforcement actions, and it is already achieving substantial success. For example, it undertook Operation In Our Sights 1 and 2, which specifically targeted websites and operators that distribute counterfeit and pirated items over the internet. Among the items available on those websites were counterfeit pharmaceuticals and pirated movies, television shows, music, software, electronics, and other merchandise. Now, because the private sector plays a critical role in preventing IP theft and counterfeiting, CBP is also expanding partnerships with businesses to improve import safety, focusing on increasing transparency and information sharing. And this includes working with specific industries like the pharmaceutical companies to prevent counterfeiting and implement best practices where the entire supply chain of pharmaceuticals is concerned. In connection with that, we were actually looking across the entirety of the global supply chain to see how we can strengthen it, working with business, working with foreign governments, working with our interagency partners to improve targeting capabilities as well as our joint enforcement activities. This year, ICE entered into formal agreements with China and the Republic of Korea to combat IP theft. And these partnerships are producing results. China recently initiated a 6-month campaign to combat IPR infringement, focusing on better monitoring of the sources of production, improved border security, and increased enforcement and public awareness. ICE has also continued to step up its own enforcement actions to make sure we're stopping violations, but also sending an unmistakable message to those who would break the law. In other words, driving up the consequences of breaking the law in this industry. In fiscal year 2010, ICE initiated over 1,000 IPF theft cases, which was a 38% increase over the prior year. Criminal charges flowing from ICE-initiated IP investigations increased 79%. So we thank the Department of Justice for its partnership there. And ICE has continued successful enforcement efforts like Operation Mercury, which focused on interdicting smuggled pharmaceuticals in partnership with the World Customs Organization. This year, 36 customs agencies from around the world participated in Operation Mercury. Operation Pangea, which also involved the World Customs Organization and Interpol, resulted in the seizure of almost 11,000 packages containing 1 million counterfeit pharmaceuticals worth more than $2.5 million, and the takedown of almost 300 websites selling counterfeit drugs worldwide. Through efforts like these and others, we can, I think, better protect consumers from the health and safety risks associated with counterfeit products. We can work with businesses to protect their intellectual property, and we can continue to take coordinated action across our interagency family and indeed internationally. Next year, we intend to do even more. So we appreciate the partnerships announced here today, and we appreciate the partnerships that we have, especially with the Justice Department, which is critical to our joint success. Thank you very much.
John Morton serves as the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the Department of Homeland Security. Director Morton came to ICE with an extensive background in federal law enforcement and immigration law and policy experience. He's held numerous positions within the Department of Justice, most recently as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division. He also served as counsel in the former Immigration and Naturalization Service, as an Assistant United States Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, and as Acting Chief of the Domestic Security Section. Mr. Morton is a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law and is really leading the charge on an enforcement side against IP criminals. Please welcome Director Morton.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I am indeed John Morton, the Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I'm very happy to be addressing you here today. We are the principal investigator of intellectual property crimes, as you know, and we lead the IPR Center right across the river in Arlington. In a forum like this, I like it. I'm the son of a preacher, and here I'm preaching to the converted, and I know that, and it makes life a little easier, and I'm not going to drone on at length. I'm just going to hit a few themes that I think we need to be better at when we push our message in the public, because a lot of the challenge that we face is changing public attitudes. And I think we need to speak a little more directly. We need to speak in English, and we just need to get our message out. And from my perspective, it goes a little bit like this. I mean, we need to convince people that counterfeiting spells trouble for America, pure and simple, right? We all know it robs Americans of jobs. It robs Americans of innovation and creativity. We need to make the point it fuels organized crime, not in the abstract. It's not, you know, at the corner of 4th and Main. It is organized crime, and that's where the money goes. And our focus here today, that it creates a serious risk of harm to consumers. And we got to make sure that that latter point, that counterfeiting threatens the health and safety of Americans, is not just taken as an abstract concern. It's an immediate problem. And as we've just heard, you know, we've got to focus on the real effect. It's counterfeit toothpaste, you know, putting something in your mouth every day that doesn't make sense for you if it is full of adulterated chemicals. Heart medicine, you know, airbags. We just got done with an airbag case where counterfeit airbags were being made in China and then ultimately put in cars throughout the United States. Engine parts, ball bearings, something as simple as ball bearings, counterfeit, and then leads the engine to come apart. And I think people will appreciate that when they start to think about the ball bearings in the car they're riding in, or better yet, in the GE engine that is turning to their right as they're at 30,000 feet. Fake tourniquets on the battlefield in Iraq, Kevlar suits, oncology medication, baby formula. People understand those things. The batteries, the circuit boards, the number of cases that we've been doing with Cisco lately, a real challenge for us. The lights for the Christmas tree. You don't want the Christmas tree to explode in flame. We need to make sure that people understand no good comes from any of this. It's dangerous to our safety. It's dangerous to our economic well-being. I think we need to really press home the point that counterfeiters don't follow safety standards. They don't open their factories to health inspectors. They don't pay taxes, whether they're federal, state, or local. They don't invest any money, like you do, to find the next cure, to find the next technological leap, the next advance that makes our country great. That's what we're about in America. Innovation, advance, that's the strength of our country. These people make money by stealing other people's ideas, other people's work, and then they pass it off on their own. Just one case that I think highlights, particularly in the context of health and safety, why this is important to all of us, not only here in the United States, but across the world. We, a few years, started an investigation into a gentleman named Kevin Hsu in Houston. Many of you are probably familiar with that case. And worked that case with a lot of different people, the FDA, UK authorities, our friends at the Department of Justice, Lilly and Pfizer, and yes, the Chinese Ministry of Public Security. One of the rare cases that we've had in the last couple of years where we had genuine support and investigation from Chinese law enforcement, but it was a real success. Hsu wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a pharmacist, he wasn't a research scientist, yet his company was selling counterfeit drugs on the internet, distributing them throughout the United States and the UK, primarily through the mail and express courier services. In the UK, it got so bad that his counterfeits actually entered the legitimate wholesale supply chain. And the authorities were forced to conduct not one, but 3 recalls, Class 1 recalls of medicines, totaling about $9 million. And unlike many of the cases that are in the news about lifestyle drugs, these were real medicines that immediately hit home on why this is important, right? Counterfeit Plavix is a heart medicine, Casodex, cancer medication, and Zyprexa, which is used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. This gentleman was playing with fire for all of us. Fortunately, we were able to arrest you, stop him in the middle of the game, presented him to the Department of Justice. He was prosecuted in 2009, sentenced to 78 months, and in order to pay, importantly, restitution of $1.28 million. Of course, as you all know, there are many, many Kevin shoes out there. Counterfeiting is a global criminal industry. The good news is there are a lot of ICE agents out there. There are a lot of FBI agents out there. There are a lot of federal prosecutors out there. There are a lot of CBP officers out there. And make no mistake about it, we are after the Kevin shoes of the world. As you just heard from the Secretary of Homeland Security, our investigations at ICE from an intellectual property perspective are at an all-time high. And that means that the prosecutions that are being done at the Department of Justice are up. ICE isn't successful unless we have a partner at the Department of Justice, and we do. And you're going to see this continue next year. Our efforts are going to be very strong. We're simply going to go after counterfeiters wherever we can find them. If we can find them on the internet, we're going to go after them. If we find them in a back alley, we're going to go after them on the corner of 4th and Main. A few things as I close here just to take away. I think we have to spend a lot of time making sure that we come together around a few key points, both internally and with the public. First, we have to genuinely believe that counterfeiting is serious and deserves our attention. And that's for all of us here in the audience, and then all of the, and that'll reflect in our efforts to try to convince the public. Second, we have to work together. I think without an open and strong partnership between industry and government, this is ultimately a losing cause. And for it to be a winning cause, we need to work strongly together, openly together, and not be defensive about that. And we need your expertise, we need your referrals, we need your thoughts on how we can tackle this problem. You know the problem better than we do. We have to convince the average American that counterfeiting hurts them individually. Again, it's not some abstract concern about wealthy corporate elites. It's about the danger that it poses to them personally, both in physical terms and in economic terms. And finally, I want to make sure that everybody realizes that the federal government is intent on enforcing the law. And I give this message often when I'm speaking, but I mean it sincerely. If I were in your shoes, I'd recognize that this is a fairly extraordinary time in intellectual property enforcement. Here you have the Attorney General of the United States making it a priority at the Department of Justice. You have the Secretary of Homeland Security making it a priority at the Department of Homeland Security. You have the first IPEC, who is in short order, set up an office and is leading the charge. So I've been in federal law enforcement my entire career, and I've never seen this kind of attention to intellectual property enforcement. Hopefully you feel that, but my message to you is seize the day and get out there and make hay while the sun shines, because you got a lot of thoughtful, important people trying to make this work, and who knows what will happen in the future. But it's right here, it's right now. So with that, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for your support up until now. I look forward to the next year or two working with all of you to go out and just keep doing more of the same. Thank you.
Tony, do you want to bring your panel up? While the first panel gets settled, let me just say, as John said, there are many experts in the audience. Tony West is going to lead this panel, asking questions of the panelists, but at some point we encourage the audience to start asking questions and answering questions as you can. Let me just close this door. Tony West serves as the Assistant Attorney General of the Civil Division. In that capacity, he oversees prosecutions of violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act brought by the Department of Justice. Mr. West previously served as a Special Assistant to the Deputy Attorney General, as an Assistant United States Attorney in the Northern District of California, and as a litigation partner at Morrison & Foerster in San Francisco. Mr. West graduated with honors from Harvard College and received his law degree from Stanford Law School, where he was elected president of the Stanford Law Review. Please welcome Tony West.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Andrew, and good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us this morning and for this panel discussion on the dangers of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. All of us gathered here this morning recognize that counterfeit pharmaceuticals, they pose a serious threat. They not only threaten our economic well-being, as billions of dollars in innovative research and development are undermined by knockoff look-alike pharmaceuticals that are backed by little more than greed and cheap, sometimes unsafe ingredients. But more importantly, we know that these medicines, they undermine the health and lives of countless men, women, and children around the world who turn to them seeking relief, but who instead find that these medicines are at best useless or at worst life-threatening poisons. Counterfeit pharmaceuticals are so dangerous because they're simply not what they purport to be. They are often used unwittingly, and at times, and at the times when we are most vulnerable, we rely on them, believing them to be safe and effective to ease our pain and the pain of those we love. And there are too many tragic examples of how counterfeit pharmaceuticals have caused harm to those who have trusted them. As you've heard, a counterfeit cancer medicine that actually turned back the clock on the progress of cancer patients who took it, or counterfeit HIV medication that cut short the life expectancy of someone suffering from AIDS, or counterfeit cough medicine, which was unwittingly distributed by public health officials in Panama, a poison masquerading as relief manufactured in China that killed nearly 100 children. And in that case, the counterfeiters substituted glycerin, which is a safe ingredient often found in food and medicine, with less expensive diethyl glycol, a poisonous solvent which is used in brake fluid. Until recently, the instances of counterfeit medicines ending up on the shelves of American consumers, those were thankfully relatively rare. And that's because state and federal regulators and law enforcement have woven a tight web of comprehensive laws, regulatory safeguards, and enforcement strategies which have worked to keep us safe. But this is beginning to change. Increasingly, Americans are turning to the internet, to online pharmacies, to medicines overseas, sources which are outside the standard regulated pharmacies. These unregulated online pharmacies, they often masquerade as legitimate, but they really open an illicit channel which goes around our health and safety laws and regulations because they promise huge rewards and profits, and many believe relatively low risk to those who offend. Now, the federal government is engaged in a three-pronged effort to combat the health and safety risks posed by the counterfeit medicine trade. First, we're working hard to maintain the integrity of regulated pharmacies, where most Americans still purchase their medicines, by working with states and with the pharmaceutical industry, with many of you, to ensure that we have the right regulations and the right standards in place for pharmacies, wholesalers, manufacturers, and distributors. Second, we're increasing our efforts to educate consumers about the serious risks which are posed by purchasing medicines outside of the regulated legal channels. And third, we're stepping up our enforcement efforts, as you've heard, against illegal sources of medicines, including illegal online pharmacies. In the Department of Justice, in the Civil Division, which I head, for example, we handle many IP cases, health and safety cases dealing with pharmaceuticals and medical devices, consumer goods, and we've recently formed a team of attorneys dedicated to handling counterfeit pharmaceutical cases, especially those which are trafficked over the internet. And all of this is taking place through the efforts of numerous federal agencies, through coordination provided by the Interagency Working Group on Counterfeit Pharmaceuticals, which is an idea born out of this administration's joint strategy on IP enforcement. And none of this could be effective without the work of our partners in state and local government, and state and local law enforcement, and our partners in the private sector, all of whom are represented here today, and who share this strong commitment to protecting the American people from counterfeit pharmaceuticals. We are fortunate that many of those individuals are represented on today's panel. All are leaders in finding solutions to the problem of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. Let me start on the far end with John Clark, Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Pfizer. John is responsible for ensuring that Pfizer personnel, products, property, and assets are protected. This includes Pfizer's pioneering work in addressing the problem of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. John understands that the public-private partnership that we have in combating counterfeit pharmaceuticals is essential to meeting this challenge. He is the former Assistant Deputy Secretary at ICE, where he was responsible for the overall management and coordination of the agency's operations. John, thanks for joining us this morning. Next to John is Tom Kubik, right? President and CEO of the Pharmaceutical Institute, or PSI, a not-for-profit membership organization comprised of over 3 dozen pharmaceutical manufacturers. Tom is a veteran of the FBI, where he gained wide recognition for his innovative programs and in the laboratory division and the criminal investigation division. PSI began as an effort of security directors like John Clark, and is today a key resource for pharmaceutical companies as well as for the government as we together grapple with the extent of the counterfeit pharmaceutical challenge. Tom, thanks for being with us. I got Tom and Carmen mixed up. In between John and Tom is Carmen Catazzo, the Executive Director of the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy and Secretary of the Association's Executive Committee. And as I mentioned, the U.S. supply chain is kept secure by a tight network of state and federal regulations, and the National Association of Boards of Pharmacies plays a central role in ensuring that that tight network remains tight. It is the state boards of pharmacies that make up the association which regulate the practice of pharmacy in this country, and Carmen is a nationally recognized expert and leader in the fields of pharmacy practice and regulation, having served as the leader of several major pharmacy practice organizations throughout the country, including U.S. Pharmacopoeia, the non-governmental public standard setting authority for the pharmaceutical industry. Carmen, thanks for being with us this morning. And finally, we have my colleague at the Food and Drug Administration, John Taylor. John is the counselor to the commissioner in the office of the commissioner at the FDA. And as counselor, John advises the commissioner on policy development, interpretation, and integration, and he specializes in regulation, compliance, and enforcement. For over 2 decades, some of that time in government, some of that time in the private sector, John has been dedicated to the fight against counterfeiting, the counterfeiting of products that FDA regulates. He's a close and valued partner of those of us at the Department of Justice in addressing the challenges posed by counterfeit pharmaceuticals. And I want to thank John and his colleagues at the FDA for their assistance in putting this panel together. So John, we are lucky to have you this morning. Why don't we start at the far end with John Clark? Can you give us an idea, John, of how easy it is for these online pharmacies to get started?
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, it's too easy. I have a short presentation to give today, and it's not unique to Pfizer. This is something that Lilly could give, Abbott could give, Merck could give, Our problems with counterfeit medicines are not different, and our shops collaborate very closely together, our security shops. If there's 2 points I'd like to make today, it's that counterfeits are not made and sold with the intent of providing relief to needy patients in the world at cheap prices. It's an insidious crime whereby the manufacturer and distributor have no regard whatsoever for the end patient. It's driven totally by greed and illegal profit motives. The other thing is the online pharmacies, and we walk a fine line here between trying to raise public awareness relative to the dangers of counterfeit medicines without making people so paranoid that they question the medicine in their cabinet, or as they walk into a CVS or a Walgreens, that is this legitimate. The U.S. supply chain, legitimate supply chain, is extremely secure. It's the most secure in the world. Our vulnerability here in the United States is online pharmacies. And if you go online and you see some of these very, very sophisticated rogue online pharmacies, it's hard to convince people that they're selling counterfeit medicines. There's telltale signs. The National Association of Board of Pharmacies does a certification, and you can go onto the VIPPS website and ensure that the online pharmacy is certified. But if they're, if the medicines are too cheap, if they don't ask for a prescription, if they don't have an address whereby you can really identify where they're operating from, these are things that should indicate that that online pharmacy is a problem, and you should question whether it's worthwhile purchasing from them. I'll go through a real quick presentation, and I've tried to make it not so much Pfizer because I think it touches upon the issues and points we'd all like to make on the panel, and then also allow time for discourse on many of these things. So, James, if you would. This slide is only up there just to reinforce the fact that the vendors of counterfeit merchandise are, in my opinion, despicable. This ties into the last slide. So if you just go on to the next. The thing that sells counterfeits anymore, packaging and production of the medicine. Very, very high quality between internet, computers, the capability of criminal organizations to make appearance-wise products look like they're authentic is getting increasingly sophisticated. So here you have side-by-side Pfizer products. Very, very difficult, even blown up like this, to really have any telltale signs of which is authentic, which is counterfeit. For our purposes, the one on the right is the authentic Pfizer product. The one on the left is counterfeit. Appearance over efficacy, you'll see the one on the left, this is what it was containing: boric acid, brick dust, highway paint, and floor wax. Notice the can of floor wax, resists scratches, durable and hard wearing, a natural low sheen finish, all nice qualities for a counterfeit medicine. We'll ignore the fact that it says superb protection for wooden floors. Again, indications. And this one, again, on the right is the legitimate, but you'll see it's actually a lot more worn. It doesn't have that nice floor wax sheen that the ones on the left do. Counterfeit packaging. This came out of Russia. Even experts would have difficulty distinguishing the authentic from the counterfeit. But if you'll notice, it actually is just a little bit of a change in the way the level of the wording there on the packaging. The next few these are legitimate Pfizer manufacturing facilities, and again, this could be an Abbott facility, a Merck facility. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent to ensure that the quality of the products that the pharmaceutical companies are dispensing are safe, secure, heavily regulated. And what I'd like to do now is there'll be a little bit of an audio. It's a little scratchy, but what we had done a couple of years ago, we were doing some test purchases from a counterfeiter in Canada, and we were trying to get a better sense of his operation. So in the course of making some orders, we had indicated that we might be interested in actually setting up shop in the United States. And we wanted to get a sense from him how difficult it would be to set up a counterfeiting manufacturing facility in the United States. And if you listen to the bad guys' discourse, it's pretty unnerving to see how really simple it is.
What do you think? What kind of investment you think
That's
if
our
we were
guy.
to do something like that over here? Hopefully, with your help, what kind of investment in terms of dollars do you think we'd need?
It's getting a press,
Yeah.
and then you need something about the size of a double garage. Then you need an air compressor, and you can really use anything for a blender.
Right.
The blender is really the last thing we want to use. It's a couple $100 to get a coffee grinder in case you have to grind something.
Yeah.
And the biggest cost is the press, actually.
The press. Right. Right. So what do you think for good quality press? What do you have to pay?
It's not far more than 20,000-30,000.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is, now they watch the presses.
Right. Right. Yeah, I know. That just makes sense.
You can bring one in pieces from South America,
Uh-huh.
but they watch the parts.
Yeah.
And it's because of all the clandestine labs wanting
Damn
press. So
clandestine labs
really,
making
I
it
would
tough on the
suggest
counterfeiters.
if you can find a press, either a flat rotary or a single punch lab press,
Uh-huh.
then we can work around it.
Okay. I'll do some research.
Yeah, you have some people that will sell you one without any grandfather papers.
Right.
You just want to make cash. You don't want to have to give them your business license number, your tax number, your corporate registration.
Yeah, right. I don't want to get involved in any of that.
None of that. No. I got lucky. I found a guy that had one, and so mine is a single punch.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like even without it being modified. Like when I go pick it up, the guys that have it take their modifications off.
Uh-huh.
My guys can still fill it, turn the wheel, and we can still make $50,000 a month.
Wow.
And that's by hand.
That's awesome.
It's scary. The investment that's required, and when all you have to do is put flour, boric acid, brick dust as your binding agent into something and make it appear as if it was an authentic medicine, doesn't take a lot of work. So that's where the press is really the key for these people. All of those pictures obviously were taken from investigations we had done with various global law enforcement agencies. Pfizer's doing this presentation because we had more pictures, I think, than the other companies. Websites, as I was saying, that's the vulnerability here in the United States. Andrew Stempler, a case done back in the, I think in about 5 or 6 years ago, RX North, many people involved with it. Wonderful, verbiage up there that he is a president, CEO. I'm also a pharmacist in a profession, and I entered into desire to maintain the good health of people and can't believe the cost of medicine. So here I am offering you all, these opportunities to buy these medicines from me in my Canadian pharmacy at very, very low prices. And if we'll watch Mr. Stempler's route for sourcing, his medicines originated in China, went to Hong Kong, transshipped through Dubai, up to the UK, down to the Bahamas where they were repackaged, sent back to the UK, and eventually get to their customers in Canada, the United States. None the wiser, especially if you've got some type of shipping invoice showing it's actually coming from the UK. The normal patient would think, well, he said he was a Canadian pharmacy, but I'm sure he has some product being manufactured in the UK. It's got to be good. But in fact, never realizing it was actually manufactured in China. One case in particular where the British Columbia woman was determined to have died as a result of ingesting medicines for a period of time from an online pharmacy, tainted with heavy metals. Very, very sad case. Nobody questioned where her medicines were coming from as she was having all of these symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. And it wasn't until after the fact they realized that she had been purchasing them off the internet from a rogue online pharmacy. And it's amazing how many doctors don't ever think of, if their patient isn't responding to the medicine that they've prescribed, to perhaps ask, where are you getting your medicine from? It's usually something, the patient just, for whatever, isn't reacting right or something. Maybe they'll go to another medicine, or perhaps the patient will die in the meantime, which again gets back to the fact that there's total disregard in the terms of the intent of the manufacturers of counterfeit for what happens when patients take these products. I'll close with this. Washington Post back in September had a nice article on counterfeit medicines in India. And at the end of the article, they're sitting there waiting for a shipment of counterfeits to come in, and they're interviewing one of the recipients who's involved with the organization, and his quote is just phenomenal. There's a lot of profit in this. I do not think about right or wrong. I'm not killing anybody. The worst is that these medicines will not show any result, and the patient may have to check into a hospital. So that's the sales pitch for the counterfeiters. It's we might not kill you, but we'll just probably only put you in a hospital. I mean, that type of thought process is really what's behind all of these counterfeits. It's what drives us, drives government agencies to really do our best to try and root this out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the panel.
Well, thanks, John. And let me jump to the other end here. John Taylor. John Clark talked about walking this line between informing consumers and letting people know about the dangers of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. But as we've seen, and as John has demonstrated, there's a very real threat in terms of what people have to be educated about. Walking that line between that and also reassuring people that we do have the safest drug supply chain in the world in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about the unique challenges that law enforcement faces in walking that same line, particularly what FDA is doing to meet those challenges?
Yeah, sure, Tony. Just before I do that, I just want to reinforce a point that both Tony and John made, which is that due to the comprehensive regulatory structure we have in the United States and the enforcement efforts on the behalf of federal, state, and local law enforcement, that there's still a rarity associated with the prevalence of counterfeit drugs. And we think American consumers should still have a high degree of confidence. However, because of the online pharmacies and foreign websites, there has been a breach, and this has led to a dramatic increase in counterfeiting activity over the last few years. And this is a disturbing enough trend that it warrants all of our attention, which is one of the reasons why we're having the forum today. As a part of balancing the need to address the law enforcement component while at the same time adequately informing consumers about the potential dangers, FDA has had a lot of experience with this and learned, quite frankly, in very difficult ways how to do this well. I think earlier we talked a little bit about Professor Roberts' situation, which I'm aware of because at the time I was actually overseeing the investigators working on that case. And learning from that experience, one of the things that we focused on was moving these investigations in a parallel track, i.e., as soon as we got word that a product was potentially counterfeited, we tried to push that information out as quickly as possible. And at first, we tried to do that with a limited set of partners, then realized we could not do that alone. Then we began to work with Carmen and others and medical groups, and what we would do is enlist anyone who would be willing to help us, get their assistance in pushing out information regarding the potential product, And then that information would include how to identify that product, who to report to if you had a health problem associated with that product, who to talk to if you had some information about who was responsible for perpetrating the scheme. And at the same time we were doing that, we also were looking for ways to get the product recalled. And then we would work on messaging that would accompany that recall. And then as another pillar, we would work on the criminal case. So to give a tangible example, several years ago we worked with Pfizer in regards to a big situation where in 2003 where counterfeit Lipitor arose. FDA, in conjunction with Pfizer, ended up putting out 4 consumer alerts, doing 4 recalls, warning the public, and I think at some point someone from FDA or Pfizer was on all the news shows in an attempt to, 1, make sure people were aware of what was out there, 2, by making people aware of the danger, we actually were able to get more law enforcement leads. It led to an increase of calls to FDA about suspect products so that we could enhance our investigation. And at the same time we were doing that, it allowed us, as time went on, to give people better information about where to return product, what the dangers were with the product that we were actually tested. And so that's those are some of the steps, but it's a very difficult balance because obviously right out of the box, you do not want to undermine the confidence of patients because patients need to be taking these medicines. This goes back to John's point about sort of the wanton disregard of the people who are perpetuating these schemes. They are preying off people who need these medicines, if not for sustaining their life, for at least the important purpose of alleviating suffering. And so as you're putting out your message, you don't want to cause such a chilling effect that people don't take the legitimate medicine and therefore, by doing so, contributing in a way to the harm that these patients could be suffering. So that's part of the difficult nuance, Tony, in putting out the proper messaging, while at the same time you're engaging in the law enforcement activities that hopefully will lead to discovery of who's responsible for the counterfeiting.
Mm-hmm. Tom Kubik, one of the things that John Taylor just talked about was this partnership between government and the private sector, particularly when it comes to educating consumers, when it comes to, with regard to a drug recall, investigating that and actually implementing a recall of counterfeit pharmaceuticals. Can you talk a bit about PSI's work in facilitating those types of public-private synergies? And if you'd also talk about the extent of the problem. How is PSI measuring the extent of the counterfeit pharmaceutical challenge?
Sure, I'll be glad to. It's good to be here. It's good to look out into the audience and see so many people that we work with on a daily basis. It's also good to look out in the audience and see some potential new partners with many willing hands, good ideas, and we welcome your participation. The Pharmaceutical Security Institute was established by the security directors with an initial work done in the early 1990s as they saw their products being counterfeited and they saw other manufacturers' products that were counterfeited. So from that time forward, there was a continued effort to focus on the collection of data. Because when we went to law enforcement, when we went to the FDA, when we went to Customs, when we went to Interpol, World Customs Organization, the question was the same. How big is this problem? How do you know it's at this level? Is it increasing or is it decreasing? So by 2001, the Institute had a substantial change in direction, and we began focusing on the collection of incident data. Let me give you an example. In the United States, in September of 2010, according to the Uniform Crime Report issued by the FBI, we know that violent crimes fell 5.2%. In a similar fashion, that report documented property crimes, which also fell 4.2%. But the question is, where in the federal government's effort in the United States, or for that matter, anywhere in the world, does law enforcement, customs authorities count counterfeit incidents? So we felt there was a particular need to document the problem and to do it in the fashion of an incident-based reporting. Our effort was to be able to specify where the counterfeit was found, what was counterfeit. Was it the packaging? Was it the product? Was it the inserts? As well as a verified test that says this is in fact counterfeit. And it was from that early work that today we're able to say that there was over a 700% increase in the number of counterfeit incidents worldwide from the initial counting that we began in 2002 until 2009. Additionally, we looked at what's being counterfeited. We hear a lot of, and there's been some allusions to it this morning, about certain therapeutic categories which have substantial amounts of counterfeit products. But in fact, what we saw last year was there was 808 different medicines that were counterfeited worldwide, critical life-saving medicines that had been counterfeited, and that was over a 7-year period, growing from roughly 250. So for the last 7 years in the worldwide traffic, there's been 75 new, unapproved counterfeit medicines with no one has any idea as to whether or not these are effective or safe, but I can assure you they're neither safe nor effective that have been found. So additionally, we see the increase in counterfeit incidents, we see the increase in medicines that are being counterfeited, and today there are literally millions of counterfeit copies of drugs that are moved around the world. One of the challenges, if I could,
No, go ahead.
that faces us is the challenge that John Morton raised, which is how do you educate the public? How do you convince them? Because there's a good deal of confusion that the counterfeiting organizations use to interject in the discussion, particularly online. So as I go down the line to order some medicines from one of these rogue sites, I'll be looking at a branded medicine, for example, or a well-known generic brand, and then all of a sudden the last screen that pops up is, oh, by the way, you can save 40% if you bought your statin as a generic version. So I'm thinking this is a generic version. In fact, it's not a generic version that's approved anywhere. More than 9 times out of 10, it's a counterfeit product with little or no active pharmaceutical ingredient. So that's the challenge that we face, getting that message out in a consistent fashion so that people understand it. And one of the very best organizations has been the work done by the Partnership for Safe Medicines in terms of educating the public. So there's a need to educate the healthcare professionals, certainly law enforcement, which is not always in tune to this problem worldwide, as well as the general public at large.
Well, Carmen, can you talk a little bit about the unique perspective that you and your colleagues have, particularly at the National Association, on what's working and what's not? Tom talked a bit about, how to measure that, but you actually, at the level in which you're working, you can actually see what's been effective and what's not been effective.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for the chance to be here this morning as well and share some thoughts with you. What we see as working is the U.S. distribution system. As the other panelists have said, when you obtain a medication that's been approved by the FDA through a licensed practitioner and a licensed pharmacy, that system's safe. When you go outside of that system, we've created an environment where it's a lot easier and more productive to sell prescription drugs online than to sell crack or heroin on the street. And that's the situation that we want to avoid. What we found works is identifying those sites, finding out where they're located, and many times they have a presence here in the United States, and working to shut down that presence. Whether it's a brick and mortar pharmacy, whether it's a domain registration, whether it's a distribution center, efforts have to be combined to shut down those sites and put them out of operation. If they're outside of the country, that's where we found is the biggest problem and the least ability for us to have an impact on the internet business. What's also working to some degree is educating consumers. But as other panelists have said, many consumers don't take this as a serious threat to their public health. In fact, many legislators up until this point didn't take this as a serious concern. And when John and I appeared before numerous congressional and Senate panels in the past, those legislators told us that they weren't going to take any action until they saw the dead bodies. We thought that was irresponsible. And so now we're back a few years later. People are beginning to realize the message that we brought forth earlier, beginning to see it's a serious concern, and we see that's working. Ultimately, a public-private partnership that includes voluntary and mandatory controls is going to be the only way to address this issue. And it has to include a very intense and a very high-profile consumer education component to educate people not to venture into this area not to do things outside of the safe system that's established between the FDA and licensed pharmacies, pharmacists, and physicians.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. I just want to follow up on some points that Carmen made. Also, it's nice to appear on a panel with Carmen where we're not under oath, which is really most of our appearances. He makes a couple really important points, and since he opened the door, let me follow through on a point that both he and Tom made. All too often, harm is defined by simply death, which is important and tragic. However, the potential harm is much broader than that. And I think that is one of the things that has made this debate difficult in the past. I think it's also one of the reasons why people have not taken this seriously. I think the defining of the potential harm is so important. So when I was a young attorney, and Tony's shop at Justice has been working on these counterfeit cases forever, the Office of Consumer Litigation, and I was right out of law school, and as a young guy, you get a ticket to go to horrible places with lots of warehouses full of documents. And it had to do with a counterfeit case where it wasn't the finished product itself that was counterfeit, it was the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And by the way, this was a generic, just to illustrate the fact that this harm could occur in an innovator drug and a generic drug. But this was an epilepsy drug where people for years had not had seizures, had had a wonderful quality of life, had been doing great, and then all of a sudden, all over the country, people were having breakthrough seizures after 6, 7, 8 years. And it took a while to figure it out, and we realized that it was the active pharmaceutical ingredient itself that was counterfeit. The particle size was larger than the authentic, and therefore it was dissolving in the blood slower, and hence people were having seizures. That's a situation where people did not die, but the harm was still very great. If you take a heart medicine, and it's a narrow therapeutic index, and you're not getting the alleviation of your suffering, that's a harm. But when Carmen and I have made these arguments in the past, the response has, well, there's no dead bodies. And I think one of the things we have to do as part of this larger argument, I think John and Tom made the same point as well as Tony, is make sure people understand that the harm is broader than that. And that is what is so important about fighting this threat.
Another important point about the story you just related, John, is that it is sometimes it can be what appears to be a legitimate pharmaceutical that has a counterfeit ingredient, that is a key ingredient that actually causes the harm. And I think actually, if Professor Rick Roberts, who's with us, if you wouldn't mind kind of coming up, because I think what, and you can just take a seat here on the end, I think part of what your, come on up, part of what your experience illustrates is that while online pharmacies are clearly one of the difficult areas where you're going to, where consumers can actually get counterfeit pharmaceuticals, it's not the only source. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience.
Sure, and I do believe that we have the safest supply chain and distribution of pharmaceuticals in the world. I took over 10,000 pills last year. I go to my pharmacy trusting that what I get, although my pharmacists know me well and know that I'm going to check every pill before I leave the counter.
That's good.
But I did. I went to my CVS pharmacy and picked up my medications, injected them for a month, and then noticed stinging and went back, picked up another month's supply, noticed some changes, asked my pharmacist, and he said, you should go home and check. You may have gotten some of the fake stuff. Those were his words, and I did, and found out that I had received counterfeits, 2 different batches created by 2 different sets of bad guys from my CVS pharmacy. And I mentioned CVS not to single them out, but just to point out that it was a major chain in the United States. And while this is not the majority of cases, the haven really is the internet, it does happen. And I think from the consumer end, there are things that as consumers we need to know. Because I had no idea what that even meant when he said, you may have gotten the fake stuff. It was, I had no idea what that could mean. And I went home and got online and found an article in the Boston Globe that explained that 7 states this had been counterfeited in, and I had been exposed to that. And for me, then, the immediate question becomes, if it wasn't the drug I needed, what had I injected myself with, which is what my doctor wanted to know. And then it took 6 months ultimately to find that out, and that was the difficult. And so when we talk about harm, I think part of it is evaluating what did happen to me, or what did I do to myself or my body by taking that counterfeit. So the absence of the medicine was one concern. The other concern is what then happened to me by consuming or taking the pharmaceutical. So when we're measuring harm, I think there's those two sides to that issue. And when people have asked me or talked to me about where are the bodies, I always ask them how many bodies would satisfy their need. Like,
Yeah.
how many dead bodies do they need to see before they think this is a serious issue? Because I think it's a pretty serious issue just without being a dead person.
No, it's no, and we agree with that. So,
And we are glad you're not dead.
So when Carmen and I would get this question, our response would be, well, we actually see our jobs as preventing death and preventing harm. And so waiting around for someone to drop dead was not really our mission, our goal.
Right.
Our goal was
Right.
to prevent, so we agree. But we need to get people to buy, unfortunately, it seems like we need to get people to buy in what I think is a very simple and important notion.
Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, and there's another subtlety here. Even when you have the dead bodies, it's virtually impossible to prove that the cause of death was due to the fact that they took a counterfeit medicine. And the classic example here was a series of deaths in Canada where 11 elderly males had passed away because their high blood pressure medication had no active pharmaceutical ingredient. However, by the time the coroner and the authorities began to suspect foul play, the majority of these individuals had been cremated, effectively eliminating a body of evidence, if you would. And also, there were severe underlying conditions that many of these men had. So the coroner, in our discussion, said, I cannot say that because they did not take their high blood pressure medication, they died. So it's extremely difficult, even in cases where there are bodies or suspected deaths related to a counterfeit medicine, unless it's a contaminated product where otherwise healthy individuals taking a cough medication or something die. And that is something that the counterfeiters do not want to do, frankly. They don't much care if you get better, but they certainly don't want you to die. And if you die, they'll just change their name and move on.
Are we getting better at informing consumers once we know that there's a counterfeit drug out there or there's a problem? Has the public-private partnership helped us to do a better job of informing consumers quickly without creating panic?
Tony, I think the efforts have been more successful than in the past. More people are engaged, the message easier for people to understand, and I think some of the legislators have backed off the position that this is just a front for the pharmaceutical companies and a way to control drug prices. And I think by them being more responsible, the consumers have been more receptive of the message that we've been trying to get out there.
Yeah, I think that's improved. I think the challenge is the one that John alluded to, which is, and Tom, just trying to quantify exactly how big the problem is. I mean, if we have knowledge of a problem, we inform people pretty well. The problem is that the pressure on the global supply chain is such that there's enormous challenges, one, securing that supply chain and knowing what is going on within it. And so, to me, that is weakness. I mean, I think this illicit activity has occurred for a number of reasons. One is the improved technology, better organized, more effective criminal groups that are attracted by the financial opportunities, use of internet as a sales tool, the fact that, quite frankly, the relatively weak penalties for counterfeiting that don't serve as a deterrent, and by the way, are not reflective of the very harms that we've been discussing. I mean, I think a lot of us worked on the Chew case, which was great in Houston, but 7 to 8 months? I mean, really? I mean, we are talking about products that can harm or kill people, and unfortunately, neither in the Food and Drug Act or in the statutes undergirding some of the acts is a sentence structure that's reflective of the public health risks. So those are the. I think we're warning people well, but there's still the work on these underlying challenges that we need to do together, and also with our overseas counterparts, because this isn't relegated to the United States.
Well, Andrew said we wanted to make this as interactive as possible, so let me open it up to questions.
Concerns. I mean, we'd be delighted to help get some of the information out about this problem. But one of our concerns is just what you left with, which is securing the global supply chain. And my understanding is that, I mean, it's tricky for a million reasons, but we're also very short-staffed. I mean, if you look at the number of people from the FDA who are actually abroad, it's very few, and we're not at a time where any of us are in a position to go to Congress and ask for more funding for more people. So what are the alternatives? Can you talk through a little bit about what is being done, what could be done on that piece of the problem?
Yeah, I can tell you what I think the vision is. How we get there is, you're absolutely right. There aren't enough resources at FDA. And guess what? There aren't enough resources anywhere. I mean, I went to the World Health Assembly in May. I went 10 years ago to talk about counterfeits and the internet, and I took Carmen's Verified Internet Pharmacy Site program and tried to convince the rest of the world that it was important to engage in that. But at that time, the internet was not as prevalent there as it was here, and so it was like, thank you, that's really helpful, good luck with your problem. Now, 10 years later, everyone has the same challenges, and none of us have the resources to confront them adequately. So I think the only way to do this is to work more collaboratively together, and that sounds very, swell and mom and apple pie. But what I mean concretely by that is there are things that we need to do to be able to improve our ability to share information with our regulatory partners overseas. There are things that we need to do in terms of joint investigations and from an alliance standpoint that we can improve upon to leverage those limited resources and to make sure that we understand better what's going on in all the four corners of the world. I think the reality, though, is it's going to take a while to do that well. And the one thing I've learned from my experience both at FDA and industry is that this is happening in the far reaches of the world, and to be able to get to those far reaches and shine a light on all this is going to take time. But I really do think the key is better collaboration among the regulatory, public health, and law enforcement partners around the world, because none of us have enough resources singularly to do it ourselves. And the supply chain is so integrated and so complex now, that is the only way. What we once thought were our commodities are really the world's commodities. And that's, so you have to, change your thinking and then apply the regulatory tools from that perspective.
And can I make another comment on that?
Sure.
I'd also say that to a great extent, it's the quality of the personnel engaged in the effort. You don't need a lot of soldiers if you've got, the key people who know what they're doing. And I'm going to embarrass Aline Plancone from Interpol, who's with us today. But I can tell you, in the last 5 years or so that Aline has been working this problem, we've seen, for instance, on the international stage, the number of countries involved in the operations directed against counterfeit medicines on the internet just absolutely soar from single digits to 44. So it really requires, some energy, some dedication, some commitment, not necessarily more. So it's something to think about, and it's that critical element that comes to play that can bring countries together to work the problem in a very supportive, collaborative nature. There are barriers, of course, information exchanges, but yet, there's some things that can be done, certainly from the private sector. The ability in the Strempler case that John was talking about, for Pfizer to walk into the authorities in Dubai and as a rights holder make a complaint. The drugs that were seized, 6 out of 8 were counterfeit medicines that had not previously been seen in the community. So those are tremendous assets that the industry can bring to the table if we've got some folks we can collaborate with. So thanks for a good job, Aline. Appreciate it.
Yes, right down here in the front.
So I'm Hillary Ware from Google, and I do want to thank sorry, I'm losing my voice too.
And we've got a microphone for you.
It's cold and flu season for those of us as young children. So my name is Hillary Ware from Google, and I first wanted to thank the FDA for a lot of your assistance as we move forward with this proposed private sector cross-industry pilot project. And obviously, we're going to need a lot of your expertise and experience in this as we move forward. I guess my question is, I'm hearing so much of the different needs, education, a lot more law enforcement, collaboration, and I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts on what are the immediate next steps for folks from the private sector who do want to sort of work with all of the folks at the table and try to, move this problem forward.
You guys from the private sector want to go first? You want me to go first?
Either way, be happy
Okay.
to do either.
Why don't you guys go and I'll give you my thoughts.
Having come from law enforcement, we always know there's never enough law enforcement to be the answer. As Tom alluded to, the collaboration is significant, and the global collaboration, which is a lot of what we from the private sector can enhance, because having our investigators in various countries, and many of them former law enforcement from those countries, enables us to sort of close the gap, whether it's enforcement in Dubai, even working with the MPS in China, which actually has some pretty good success records in cases we've worked with them. Just 2 weeks ago, they sentenced somebody to life in prison for a factory raid we had done the year before. So unlike Evan Zhu, there was actually a serious sentencing over there. But be that as it may, again, enforcement can only do so much. I'm a big advocate in raising public awareness. I don't think in the United States we've done enough. I was very impressed with the IBM commercial relative to counterfeit medicines recently and the packaging. And I think there's a lot more we can do. And I think that includes hitting the medical sector. Again, the doctors, I'm amazed at the lack of familiarity doctors have with this actually being a problem. So there's a lot we can do on that front to raise their awareness as well. And again, it has to be done in a way so you don't get people so worried that they question every medicine and then stop taking medicines at all. So it's a very, very fine line. It's got to be done right. But I think raising awareness is a key goal.
Yeah, and I'd only add that there's a lot of work that could precede next steps. From the pharma sector, the individual companies with their ongoing investigations have uncovered substantial information about the rogue sites, which we're more than willing to share with the registrars, the search engines, the pay folks with Visa, MasterCard, American Express. I see an ongoing dialogue that will lead to some more effective actions that go beyond just the law enforcement, search, seizure, and so on. As was mentioned, this is a very easy thing today for rogue internet sites to be set up. I mean, we've interviewed convicted counterfeiters, and it's, I don't want to say it's a joke, but it's very easy. And we need to work with you all to tighten those requirements and to look at your terms of use agreements and, look at the merchant accounts. There are controlled substances, scheduled drugs being sold online. The DEA does a lot of work, FDA does a lot of work, ICE does a lot of work, but yet go online and search for some of the popular pain meds, and they're there with big logos of how you can pay for it.
And I'd like to tee it up again for John. And this discussion today is a lot easier than in the past because John would open the door and then we would all hide under the table at the hearing. So 3 elements: agreement, commitment, and support. There has to be agreement on some basic principles as to how we stop these internet illegal activities. And one of the most basic principles would be if they're violating state or federal law, then they shouldn't be operating. Second, there's got to be a commitment that those basic agreements or those principles are enforced, even if it costs money, and you have to give up business to enforce those agreements. And then finally, there has to be support, not only in funding, but in commitment, but in a message that you send through your activities to the consumer. And that's support. What you say, how you say it, probably means a lot more in terms of the consumers accepting the message than anything else we can do.
And I'd build on that. I agree with everything these guys have said. The question from ARP was excellent, which is if it used to be that the supply chain was this. The product was manufactured domestically, maybe New Jersey, provided to a pharmacist who provided to, and somehow got to the patient, 2 or 3 prongs. Our whole act is built upon that premise of domestic manufacturing. Then things got crazy, you might get some active ingredients from overseas, and then there's customs, sends it to New Jersey, then it goes to the pharmacist. 3 or 4 prongs. What I think has changed all this with the internet is that it has changed the supply chain. It's changed the means of acquisition, it's changed the means of purchase, it's changed the interaction with your physician. And so everyone who has a role in all of those different facets needs to play a role in addressing this problem. I mean, the pharmacists and industry and FDA have been at this a while, but the world has changed around us, along with ICE and customs. But the world has changed around us, and so we need folks like yourselves, which is one of the reasons why we think this has great potential to jump in and do all you can from a corporate standpoint to help secure this supply chain and help us address these situations where legitimate business channels are being used for illegitimate means. So it's as easy to everyone doing their part.
Just to add on that real quick, I'm sorry. I think what John Morton said too earlier is very, very true. Now is the time, and I was in federal law enforcement for 28 years, and as customs, IPR protection was a significant issue for us. But I think it has risen greatly in the last few years. The creation of the IPR Center, where all of the federal agencies work together and stuff to address it, is an indication of how serious it's being taken by the government. The creation of the IPEC office now is another indicator. And the fact that they're bringing all of us together sort of with a clean slate to sort of develop a formula by which we can collaborate more and address it with all of our respective expertises and responsibilities, I think is the next step forward. So I'm going to be very interested to see where we're going to move with all of this, but very, very supportive in doing so.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. As a consumer, I understand the risk when you buy drugs over the internet, at a flea market, and I'm from New York, down on Broadway, in counterfeit areas. But my concern, though, is, and I have high blood pressure, and I go to CVS or, let's say, Duane Reade for my prescription, and I thought the doctor said he received counterfeit drugs from CVS. And so my question is, how does CVS purchase their drugs, or other pharmacies purchase drugs, to ensure that there is no counterfeit?
Yeah. You want to go into
Sure.
Good question.
The system's in place now is that pharmacy is licensed, and the wholesale distributor that purchases that drug from the manufacturer that supplies it to the pharmacy should be following all the laws and should only be buying from legitimate manufacturers and shouldn't be dealing in these black market drugs. The problem is, I'm from Chicago, so we know that people don't always follow the rules, particularly our governors. People are always trying to make a quick deal, and sometimes those drugs get into the system, and as John indicated, they're difficult to detect whether they're counterfeit or not. And so what we have to do as consumers is be vigilant about your medication. If it looks different, if it feels different, go back to your pharmacist, talk to them about it, and we have to support efforts by the FDA and the states to put in track and trace systems for these products, so when it leaves the manufacturer and comes into your medicine cabinet, we know where that medication has been in the supply chain, and we can detect a counterfeit right away.
To your point, is there a government agency that's responsible for doing audits to make sure that, they purchase where they're supposed to purchase?
Question was, is there a government agency that oversees the ordering of these products to make sure that they're... Audits. I'm sorry, audits. Really, it's sort of a quasi area between the FDA and the states. We have an accreditation program for wholesalers that's required by many of the states that's been very effective, but it's not required in all states, and so we're falling into a bit of a loophole there between federal and state authority.
And the authorities vary from state to state in regards to how these distributors and wholesalers, the requirements that one must meet before one gets in the business.
And that being the case, do you see a role for the federal government maybe to require audits to make sure that consumers are getting what they're paying for?
I don't think, people are doing audits. I think one of the questions that needs to be explored, whether there needs to be, one set of regulations regarding how distributors should be regulated, so that there's an even playing field. What happens is, because of the patchwork quilt and regulations, there's some states whose regulations are more lax than others, and invariably there tends to be more activity in that state versus others. And maybe one question that needs to be explored is whether there needs to be greater uniformity regarding what's required of these distributors.
So we can trust that you'll take that message back.
I've said it before.
Professor Roberts, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, it's just I worked with one of the state boards who, that state in particular, has done a very good job with this secondary wholesale market in terms of their numbers. I think there's maybe 3 wholesalers in the whole state versus another state that has a couple hundred. And my drug went through company in that state. It was licensed. Its company name was Reckus, R-E-C-K-U-S. That's sucker spelled backwards. And that was the name of the company. And so, but their resources were really limited in terms of regulating, inspecting the manufacturer, I mean, not the manufacturers, but after it left the manufacturers and went through this wholesaler, the wholesalers, they had limited resources in terms of keeping track of them, and I think that was an issue.
Tom, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that we probably don't have enough time to discuss all of the nuances of the issue, but it is true that the wholesalers, corrupt wholesalers, will respond to enforcement pressure on a state level, such that they'll relocate to another state. I mean, you know, many of these white-collar criminals are career criminals who are quite good, and if you don't follow any of the rules, it's pretty easy to be successful. So I think that's one of the concerns that we have, is that even with a good audit program, and there are good audits that are conducted at the state level, federal level, there still is plenty of opportunity to, you know, to go around that with false statements, business records that show checks going to authorized, legitimate McKesson's, Cardinal, and so on. When in fact, with some co-conspirators, those checks can be negotiated. So the paper trail looks pretty good. You know, and this goes to the sophistication of the criminal groups that you're looking at. The paper trail is good. It'll be, the audit won't find it. But when you've got a criminal investigator who then calls McKesson and says, hey, how often do you do business with Able? They say, we've never sold them anything. So, you know, it's a real challenge. And like I said, we'd probably talk for another 2 hours, 3 hours just on that topic and the schemes that we see out there.
Well, I think that will be the last word. John, Tom, Carmen, John, and Professor, thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for excellent questions.
You have no idea, my friend.
Well,